Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about seeking God in troubled times, Psalm chapter 27. The psalm begins, this is another psalm of David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Now, oftentimes we read about, the Lord being our salvation, but this is one of the few times in the Old Testament where God is described as my, not just the light of the world, but my light. And then he continues, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Now, what we have here are two rhetorical questions. So he starts off, the Lord is my light, my salvation. Here's the question, whom shall I fear? If God is my light, and light is what lets you see, and my salvation, that's what lets you survive the scene, then whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? And that's really two rhetorical questions, but it's really asking the same question both times. We continue into verse 2. When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh. That doesn't sound very pleasant. Now, that's not literal. We're not talking about cannibals, but it's as if they are going to just gobble me up. When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell. And so he thinks about the times when bad people came against him and they did not succeed. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war arise against me, yet in spite of this, I shall be confident. And so there's a confidence that's described here in the presence of his enemies, in the presence of those who meant evil against him, in the presence of those who threatened to gobble him alive. And yet there's a confidence because God is his light and his salvation. And so notice the safety in the past when they came upon me, when my adversaries, my enemies, they stumbled and fell. And there's not only safety in the past, because of the safety in the past, there's now confidence for the future. Even though there are those enemies yet to come, a host encamp, a war arise, yet in spite of this, the psalmist says, I shall be confident. Verse 4, one thing I have asked from the Lord. Notice that I shall seek, and that actually, that term is going to be repeated, so I circled it here. Um, that one thing that I've asked, I'm going to seek for it. Here it is, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. And notice the temple theme, dwelling in the house of the Lord. Now we've addressed this before. David didn't actually build the temple, but he anticipates it. He's actually going to talk about both the temple and the tabernacle here. And you say, well, which is it? Is it a temple or a tabernacle? And the answer is yes. In a sense, it's both. But that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold, and he wants not just to dwell, but also to see. Notice that I shall seek to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate where? In his temple again. So double reference to the temple, the house of the Lord, the temple is speaking of the same thing. We continue on into verse 5. For in the day of trouble, he will conceal me, where? In his tabernacle. Now we switch from the temple to the tabernacle, but we really haven't switched. It's still God's resident place. Um, and David finds sanctuary. Can I say it this way? He finds sanctuary in the sanctuary. He finds sanctuary in the tabernacle, in the secret place of his tent. What's he going to do? He's going to hide me, conceal, hide. We have two different lines really saying the same thing. And then we continue, he will lift me up on a rock. And we get down to verse 6. And now my head will be lifted up above my enemies around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices. So he looks at a time where he's going to not just find sanctuary in the tent, but there he will be able to worship. He'll offer sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. And what we have here is an expression of David's confidence in that future day of trouble because God has been faithful in the past. David anticipates he will also be faithful in the future. It's good for us to look at the past, so to look at how God has been faithful to us in the past, because then we have hope and faith and confidence for the future. Verse 7, hear, O Lord, when I cry. Now we have the prayer now for God's presence. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, and be gracious to me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, there it is again, that seeking idea. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, O Lord, I shall seek. Notice the um, almost chiastic sort of parallelism there. Um, so when you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Lord, I shall seek. And because of that, verse 9, do not hide your face from me. That's, God said, seek. And I said, I'm going to seek. So don't hide. Let me see it. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger, for you've been my help. Do not abandon nor forsake me, O God of my salvation. And so he's praying, Lord, I'm going to seek, but help me to find. I'm going to seek, don't hide. I'm going to seek, don't turn, don't abandon, don't forsake me in my time of trouble. Verse 10, for my father and my mother have forsaken me. He's asked the Lord, don't you forsake me, even those closest to me. I can't think of anyone closer than your father or your mother. And David says, and I'm not saying what's happened in his family life, but he's abandoned. He's cut off from his family. He's completely alone. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a level path. Now, that line, level path, we've actually seen that term before back in Psalm 26 and verse 12, where David had said, my foot stands on a level place. A level path, level place. Actually, it's the same Hebrew term. They've rendered it path versus place, but it really means the same thing because it is the same word. Where my foot stands on a level place in the congregation, I shall bless the Lord. Remember, that's how Psalm 26:12 ends. Well, here he's saying, teach me your way, O Lord, lead me in a level path because of my foes, because there are dangers on the road. So place me in that level plane, in that area where I'm not going to stumble over everything. Verse 12, do not deliver me, because of those foes, do not deliver me over to the desire of my adversaries. So notice the foes, the adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. So he's facing hostility. He's seen it in the past. He's facing it now and in the future. Verse 13, I would have despaired. Now, notice that those first four words, I would have despaired, they're all italicized. That means that the translators have added that to help us understand, because I think something's understood there, because it begins, unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. So there's an assumed idea there. I think that, and the majority of translators, not just this translation, but in a great deal, have added some words there to help us get the thing that's anticipated and unstated, because it didn't need to be stated, but they're trying to help us understand. So I think they're doing a good job. So this is the path of deliverance. Notice, unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord, and because he has believed, if he hadn't, that would be a very different story. But through faith, he has anticipated that he would, remember all the language that we saw of seeking the Lord, and he anticipates that he would see the goodness, that he is not seeking in vain, that he would see the goodness of the Lord. But notice that phrase, in the land of the living. You see, it's one thing to say, yes, I'm going to see the Lord at the end. I'm going to die and go to heaven. But he says, no, there's times where we need to see God now. And God's, of course, unseeable now because God is invisible. So how can I see God? And that's what the cross is all about, where God came with skin on. I like the story of the little girl who was trying to go to sleep, and she says, "Mommy, I'm scared of the dark." And he says, "Don't worry, Jesus, or God is there with you. And she says, but mommy, I need someone with skin on. And Jesus is the one who came with skin on in the land of the living. And so David said, unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And now, notice how verse 4, he had said, one thing I've asked from the Lord that I shall seek. In verse 8, when you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face I shall seek. Now he says, I believed that I would see, that I saw it and it would happen and that I would see. But he hasn't seen it yet. And so, verse 14, he gives himself a closing sermon. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. That's the language of faith. That's the language of believing. And it's not done yet, so he preaches a sermon to himself. And I think sometimes we need to do that. I think sometimes we need to remember how God has been faithful in the past and then preach to ourselves. Wait for the Lord, be strong, let your heart take courage. Those are all different ways of just saying believe, trust in him. Yes, wait for the Lord.